The performed or performing arts, music, dance, film, and even oratory, in every instance give us their relationship to time. Where a reader can enjoy a novel faster or slower, with any intermissions she chooses, a single performance of a symphony cannot really be slowed down or sped up by the listener, except in recollection or now with a digital aid. But even then, tempo is experienced as given to me by the playback program. When I read a novel slowly, I notice that it is I who am slow, not the novel. I can read a slow novel fast or a fast novel slow. If I read a novel quickly, say for seminar, my reason tells me that I have to abstract the feeling of rushing from my assessment of the novel's pace and quality. On the other hand, I can certainly judge that an aria or a song has been sung too fast, and therefore insensitively, or that a film moves too slowly and is therefore tedious. So now I'll pose a very strange question. By what right does a work that's performative impose such an experience of time upon us? By necessity, you might say. I couldn't experience a play unless it took place in time. Are you sure? Note the difference between a play you read and a play you watch. Note that two excellent performances may run at two very different paces, especially when local variations in tempo are part of some coherent understanding of the whole. Some dramas, so-called closet dramas, are written in the style of a play, but never meant to be performed. Can such works really require a given experience of time? Is their performative nature genuinely temporal or only stylistic? We may be led to conclude that the in-timeness of a play is only accidental, only emerges when the work is performed. Perhaps we should distinguish between a play's tempo, the time of performance, and its pacing, its internal time independent of performance. But plays themselves insist on their being in the audience's time. They evince ironic awareness of being too long, or about being too dense, or being boring. Is this pacing masquerading as tempo? The two are inseparable. So now I'll ask you a personal question. Have you ever been to a movie or a play which turned out to be a waste of time, and then felt that it was really your fault for attending in the first place? No one forced you to go. You went for excitement, for entertainment, for edification, or some other concept like Aristotle's emotional purification or catharsis. Behind this remorse is some understanding that you yourself consented to an experience in time. You went to see Antigone performed. You could have read the play at your own pace, putting it aside when your interest ebbed and picking it up again when your interest flowed. You're an imaginative person. The costumes in your head are more faithful and more splendid. They better fit your conception of the play. And you're annoyed by the infidelity of the director to that concept, or to the script, or to the text. You're annoyed with yourself. Why did you go? As time passes, though, you forget this annoyance and think some months later that you'd like to go to the theater again. This time the play you see is riveting. The actors evince real insight into their characters, deliver their lines sensitively. The duel scene had you on the edge of your seat. At the end, you burst out into tears and applause. You return home. You feel satisfied, not just aesthetically. That was an evening well spent, you say. You realize, positively, you don't regret going. So what accounts for this bizarre habit of action and its accompanying habit of mind? Why do we wager 3 hours or more of our precious lives on the chance of a play, especially if we are too polite to leave in the middle, especially if we love the work being performed and have seen good performances of it in the past, especially if we are especially critical? And why do we feel it as a wager? In what follows, I'll suggest that the enjoyment of drama as a medium disguises a fundamental human problem, namely the experience of time as either full and tending towards something, or empty and stagnant. Following Shakespeare, I'll suggest that the drama of pregnancy is a model for thinking about and coming to terms with that problem. And then at the end, I'll turn to the problem in general, but I'll spend about 3/4 of the time here discussing 4 of the plays in which Shakespeare lays, I would say, the most explicit emphasis on pregnancy, 3 of which we read in sophomore seminar. But a caveat about what I'm doing here. Although my thoughts do arise from close readings of these plays over many years, tonight I'm not really offering readings of any of the plays in particular. Rather, I'd say I'm practicing a kind of reading from afar in which I'm trying to just trace the contours of a philosophical issue that I see emerging in different ways in different plays. I think, for instance, there are psychologically deeper accounts for what characters like Rosalind and Hamlet are doing in their plays. Here, I'm interested in the close relationship between pregnancy and a certain kind of dramatic attitude. I'm happy to discuss any of the plays in more detail in the question period, including happy to get into the richer, more psychological accounts. Okay. Pregnancy is a drama of anticipation. We can say that a woman is expecting. In German, they used to say that she was guter Hoffnung, of good hope. We divide the pregnancy into acts: first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. Within the acts, there are scenes: differentiation, the emergence of sex, the quickening, the first kick, the water breaking. These moments, along with the turbulence of pain, anxiety, and nausea, derive their primary significance from the anticipated birth. For all her effort, discomfort, care, and labor, the mother's body at times seems to be an instrument of the inscrutable agent, time. All in all, though the process happens entirely within her body, she can do shockingly little to hasten or retard the process without annulling it altogether. Time, then, is at its fullest, its most significant, during pregnancy. Every passing second is inevitable progress towards the goal. It's impossible from this point of view for a pregnant woman to waste time in the true sense of the word. If she spends every day in bed howlingly bored, she is accomplishing as much of the process as if she wins an Olympic medal while pregnant. Progress is in time itself, not in the world or in actions. In pregnancy, the mere passage of time is the most perfect and significant action, and it is no action at all. Now, just to kind of highlight this from the other direction, some women approaching the end of their fertility experience a kind of secondary inverse drama, where, and of course, this is, I'm taking this from anecdotal experience, where pregnancy is time made so full as to defy passivity. Here, every passing moment is an emptying of time, an urgent call to action before it is too late. If the pregnant woman can do nothing but what furthers the process, the woman who desires pregnancy can hardly do enough. Here, significance has the same source, but as a receding possibility rather than an approaching certainty or likelihood. So that much, I think, is sort of more or less, you can take issue with it, but it's more or less common knowledge articulated. Pregnancy is a drama, but here is a less obvious point, I think. Drama, too, is a pregnancy. When we go to the theater, we see time pregnant, time made full and significant. That is the implicit contract between company and theater goer. Every moment will be significant, will tend, will be part of some larger movement. And that movement is independent of what you do as an audience member, for the most part. Some entertainment in the world is undisguised pastime, the circus, for instance, and frankly admits that time has room to spare, or in the worst cases, is empty. But drama, I'm saying, is this fundamental problem, the perception that time is empty or rare, disguised. Drama is, in a way, the representation of full time within empty time, or at least less full time. It is time's pregnancy staged, and it reveals our fundamental desire that time be full, fuller than it is, and our anxiety that it is not. Aristotle thinks that tragedy serves, among other things, to purge pity and horror, but one could just as easily say, I think, that for the person who decides to go to the theater, any strong emotions arising from significance are preferable to their absence. Aristotle also points out that the word drama means action, being the verbal noun of dran, to do, apparently almost synonymous with pragma, deed or action. But the action of drama can't be mere activity. like a circus. It must impress upon us the utter fullness of time, its tendency towards some event or birth. Almost no tragedy I know, however apocalyptic, ends without even a gesture at what has come about as a result of the foregoing catastrophe. The weakness of this gesture at the end of King Lear, for example, shows both its conventional need and its failure to mitigate the barrenness of that play's ending. And these are the lines read at the end of the play by either Albany or Edgar, depending on which textual edition you follow. The weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. And then we get the wonderful stage direction, exeunt with a dead march. The utter catastrophe of the play's last scene has degraded time's fertility. What emerges from now on, will be shorter lived and less significant. Although the play itself has been the unfolding of a drama, it seems to have given us something like the last drama, the last instance of time's true fullness. So this implicit contract I'm talking about between players and audience to make time full, to impregnate time, is mostly below the surface of conscious enjoyment of the theater, or movies, or drama of any kind. But Shakespeare, who thematized seemingly all aspects of human experience, makes more and less explicit use of the idea that drama is a pregnancy of time. And we'll see that the characters with extreme theatrical consciousness are at pains to impregnate time and ensure the shape of pregnancy with varying degrees of success. In other words, I'm saying that the very conditions of playhouse drama, namely the desire to see full, significant, pregnant time, staged in empty time, are thematized by Shakespeare insofar as his characters are made again and again to confront time's emptiness and driven to fill it by creating their own dramas. And here's still another way of saying the same thing. Plots do not happen to the characters I have in mind. Events are brought about by them self-consciously, sometimes indirectly, and sometimes not with the effect that they had hoped for, in response to or against a background of time's emptiness. Okay. So many readers of Shakespeare notice the number of characters who act like dramatists. Hamlet, Rosalind, Prospero, Iago, Edgar, Lear, Hal, to name some from the plays we read in seminar. They all seem to plan and execute some kind of theatrical design, often with unclear motives. The so-called Hamlet question, why does Hamlet delay, is really a negative question, and the positive version of it is something like, what does Hamlet do instead of immediately taking revenge? Shakespeare's longest play is made so long by Hamlet's profusion of words and deeds which seem not to tend strongly towards resolution. Now let's ask the Rosalind question. Why does Rosalind not reveal herself immediately to Orlando when they meet in the forest and he professes to be in love with her undisguised self? How about the Prospero question? Why does, despite his supernatural knowledge of and control over all the actions on the island, why does Prospero force everyone to undergo labors and trials for 5 acts before declaring that all his enemies are in his power and revealing various truths to the astonished Italians? How about the Edgar question? Disguised as poor Tom, why doesn't he reveal himself to his father? How about the Hal question? Why does he continue to associate with the company he plans from the beginning to cast off? Is it really just to appear brighter by the contrast with his former ways, as he says? So I'm not suggesting that these somewhat crudely formulated questions all have a single answer. Rather, I'm pointing out that all the characters indulge in a drama which delays their intended resolution of some dramatic tension, even when that resolution will be the major event of the plot. Note that such delay is even felt as uncomfortable by some of the delayers themselves, especially Hamlet and Rosalind, all of whom pull against their own delays. Such figures of what I'll call dramatic expansion are very often paired with figures of contraction, impatient characters who would rather hurry to the resolution of the action. To schematize a little bit, just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, The contractor for Hal is Hotspur, who's always ready to fight and wants to move on and get the battle over with. Edgar's is probably Kent, although Edmund, Goneril, and Cornwall are also hurriers in some degree. Hamlet's is the fiery Laertes, and also Hamlet himself. He, of course, thinks that everyone has tried to close the chapter on his father's death much too quickly. Rosalind's is apparently her lover Orlando, who indulges her for a while, but eventually and wonderfully declares that he can, quote, no longer live by thinking. But like Hamlet, Rosalind is really her own counterpart in this regard, and almost breaks her character many times out of excitement. Iago's Hurrier is his duped accomplice, Rodrigo. There are many other examples of these pairs in Shakespeare, and I mention them just to say that there are so many that one would like to give some kind of account of what's clearly a structural principle in Shakespearean drama. And I'll say, even though I'm not going to go into this in detail, right, if you think drama has, in a way, kind of zoomed out, has two things to do. One, it has to have some kind of action that unfolds over the course of the play, and the other is it has to end, it has to resolve that tension. And so these pairs, in a way, seem to stand for those two components of drama, and often do so explicitly in the plays. Okay, so I even if I could, I wouldn't talk about all these plays in detail right now. So let's just proceed by tracing the idea of pregnancy through four works in particular, and show the ways in which to be a dramatist character within Shakespeare's drama is also to be open to the creation of time's pregnancy as a response to time's emptiness. As a setup, or a kind of warm-up, I should say, I'll very briefly discuss a comedy we don't read as a way of plugging it and suggesting that you read it. Perhaps Shakespeare's earliest, before turning to As You Like It, Othello, and Hamlet. Okay. We don't read Love's Labour's Lost on the program. It may be Shakespeare's earliest comedy, and it contains some of the best and most explicit formulations of pregnancy as a structuring idea for drama, especially comic drama. I'll give you a very brief summary of the plot. Four lords of Navarre swear off worldly pleasures, especially interaction with women, to devote themselves to study. You can see where this is going. Naturally, they have forgotten that four French ladies are en route to visit their court, and when the ladies arrive, each man falls in love with a woman. The lords express their liking through elaborate masquerades, flowery sonneteering, and other forms of flirtation. But the women see their indirect courtship as frivolous and try to put the men off, frustrating their elaborate courtship games. One of the ladies, the Princess of France, characterizes the ensuing humor, which takes up 80–85% of the play, in terms of the failed pregnancy of the lord's efforts. I'll read this twice. It's a little convoluted. Their form confounded makes most form in mirth, when great things laboring perish in their birth. Their form confounded makes most form in birth, when great things laboring perish in their birth. The whole humor of the play comes from the lord's repeated failure to woo the women, in this instance characterized by the princess as a kind of stillbirth. The play's title, Love's Labour's Lost, also, in retrospect, paraphrases the princess's formula for comedy. The time spent in these courtships is characterized as idle or empty and out of tune with the natural rhythms of life. Barone, the most ironic of the lords, initially complains that their ascetic vow does not suit their time in life. He compares the proposal to a, quote, abortive birth, meaning a premature stillbirth, and protests that he likes, quote, each thing that in season grows. It is the time for love and being in the world, not for study and withdrawing from it. It's too late for that, he says. But their courtship still does not truly fill time, as the princess insists. Here's her rebuke to him at the end of the play. We have received your letters, full of love, your favors, the ambassadors of love, and in our maiden council rated them as courtship, pleasant jest, and courtesy, as bombast and as lining to the time. Bombast and lining to the time. Bombast means padding here. Padding or lining fills only in a minimal way. It still leaves time largely empty, in the metaphor that the princess uses. Time's true fullness is a far cry from these amusements. But at the end of the play, we who have come to see a, quote, pleasant, conceited comedy, as it was advertised, expect that the silliness will be overcome and the four couples will unite in marriage. When it is announced abruptly that the princess's father has died and the King of Navarre seizes the opportunity to make a group proposal, as though realizing the play is at its end, we expect him to be successful. Now, at the latest minute of the hour, grant us your loves, he says. And the princess replies, a time, methinks, too short to make a world without end bargain in. She puts him off for a year, vowing to be his if he still wants her after he completes a year of truly ascetic living. The other ladies follow suit, and Biron, again, the wittiest and most ironic of the suitors, grumbles, our wooing doth not end like an old play. Jack hath not Jill. These ladies' courtesy might well have made our sport a comedy. The king reassures him, come, sir, it wants a 12-month and a day, and then 'twill end. It's too long for a play, Biron responds. Biron's theatrically expressed annoyance heads off a frustration the audience may well feel, having come to see a comedy, even a comedy with this title. But as sketchy as my brief summary is, notice that the initial vow of asceticism, which is an avoidance of romance, has been replaced by one which will culminate eventually in romance after a year. Where before, the year of study was dramatically empty, leading nowhere, now it is dramatically full. Every passing moment of the year brings the couples closer to their union, through no action but the passage of time. They're given tasks to do, but the successful completion of the tasks is irrelevant to whether they'll get together at the end. The language of that year, and just trust me on this because we don't have time, but the language of the year is rich with seasonal metaphors so that the lords are imagined to have to experience the year through natural seasons and be brought back into sync with them. Now, it happens that Shakespeare may or may not have written a play called Love's Labour's Won. Such a play would now be either lost or unknown to us under that title. But I doubt that Shakespeare intends us, in any case, to see what happens to the couples. Rather, he leaves us at the end of this play with a sense that time is now pregnant. The goings-on in the play turn out to be dead ends, pastimes, or in the princess's formulation, stillbirths. But the time ahead will bear the true dramatic event. Think for a moment how daring this is on Shakespeare's part. Maybe his first comedy, but certainly one of his first commercial comedies, completely subverts the audience's expectation by declaring his own comedy a failure and turning it into a kind of prelude to a drama they will never see. The play here takes place more or less in empty time, as it turns out. The entire dramatic effect achieved here is another invisible drama off stage and after the show, the drama of time's pregnancy. Okay. No other comedy of Shakespeare's withholds the sense of comic resolution so blatantly and insistently as Love's Labour's Lost, but many of them leave us with a sense of some event still to come after the stage is emptied. If the comedies fall on a spectrum, Love's Labour's Lost being the most unresolved, let's now turn to maybe his most resolved comedy, As You Like It, which wonderfully ends with 4 marriages presided over by the god of marriage himself, Hymen. Add to the god's appearance the miraculous conversion of Duke Frederick, the villain, who's not on stage for very much of the play. And you may well wonder with the onstage characters how all this has been brought about. But if we strip all this away and think of the main romantic plot between Rosalind and Orlando, we have to ask whether there was ever any doubt of their getting together. By the wrestling match in the play's second scene, both are utterly smitten. By 3-2, when they meet in the forest, with Rosalind disguised as Ganymede, the boy, she already knows from his prolific sonnets, from Orlando's prolific sonnets, that he's in love with her. But she does not reveal herself to him, instead suggesting to cure his love madness with a kind of game in which she, Rosalind pretending to be Ganymede, will disguise herself as Rosalind and pretend to be so difficult to court that Orlando will be cleansed of his love. First, Orlando resists. I would not be cured. I do not want to be cured. But he yields at her very next urging. I would cure you if you would but call me Rosalind and come every day to my cote and woo me, she says. Now, by the faith of my love, I will, replies Orlando. And so the courtship of the remaining acts begins, in which Orlando courts Rosalind, pretending to be Ganymede, pretending to be Rosalind. But here the question so often asked of Hamlet comes up again. Why does Rosalind delay, and why does she stage the whole pageant of their mock courtship? Again, I'm just saying this out of real due diligence and my own sense of betrayal to my principles as a lover of Shakespeare. I think there are better psychological answers to the question than the one I'm about to give. But I'm most interested here in the one that concerns Rosalind as a dramatist, not as a lover. And that means as, let's just say, an impregnatrix of time. I will refer here just in passing to, I think, a wonderful little piece by the philosopher and psychoanalyst Jonathan Lear on this kind of Platonic reading of Rosalind's actions. It's a little article called Rosalind's Pregnancy. He points out that Rosalind speaks on a number of occasions as though she were already pregnant with Orlando's child, most notably in the scene just after she falls in love with him. Celia asks, "But is all this," and she means Rosalind's unusual behavior, "for your father?" Rosalind responds, "No, some of it is for my child's father." For Jonathan Lear, though, Rosalind is not anticipating a future pregnancy, but with heavily Platonic resonances, she is, quote, already pregnant with the idea of being pregnant. And later, quote, he says, giving birth to herself as an ironist. And I'm just saying these are out of context, but they're very rich and interesting suggestions. I recommend the piece. I'll send it to anyone. But I also want to suggest that what Rosalind intuits here is the way in which falling in love is a kind of unfolding drama akin to pregnancy, in which the activity is better expressed in terms of organic development than in terms of action. The relevant attitude towards falling in love, we see, is not really to do anything, but to allow the romance to develop on its own. In other words, I'm claiming that the relevant criterion here for thinking about the development of the Rosalind-Orlando romance is not, on one hand, something like whether Orlando learns anything, and not, on the other hand, whether Rosalind comes to see anything in Orlando. It's simply a matter of time. There's a too early and a too late, and one can attach secondary reasons to these judgments. Rosalind worries, for example, that he's not a true lover, and Orlando becomes desperate and can't wait anymore. But ultimately, the play is at pains to show us that love follows its own time, that romantic drama, like pregnancy, unfolds like a natural organism. Now, this drama takes place, of course, as I'm saying they all do, against a background of empty time. We might notice that the Forest of Arden is insistently characterized as being an idle, timeless place. At the end of Celia's first scene there, she remarks, "I like this place, and willingly could waste my time in it." The first two songs we hear there, sung by Amiens, confuse the time of year, suggesting first spring and then winter. And it is, by the way, notoriously difficult to determine the season or seasons in which the play takes place. There's a sea of ink, like, it's a spring play, no, it's a winter play, that kind of thing. So there's a reason for that. The first banter between Rosalind and Orlando takes up this odd but idyllic timelessness in the forest and sets the terms in which her courtship game will be played. When Rosalind as Ganymede and Orlando meet in Arden, she challenges not Orlando's poetry, which is what everyone else criticizes about him, but his sense of time, and thus his seriousness as a lover. She says, "I pray you, what is't o'clock?" "You should ask me what time of day," he responds. "There's no clock in the forest." "Then there is no true lover in the forest, else sighing every minute and groaning every hour would detect the lazy foot of time as well as a clock." Time's importance to Orlando becomes one way of judging whether he is a, quote, true lover, and it is a source of great disappointment to Rosalind, as herself, not as Ganymede, when he is not punctual. First, he breaks their appointment, leading Celia and then Rosalind to question his professions of love. He then shows up late, occasioning a rebuke along the lines of their first encounter. "Why, how now, Orlando? Where have you been all this while? You, a lover? And you serve me such another trick, never come in my sight more." "My fair Rosalind," replies Orlando, "I come within an hour of my promise." Wrong answer. "Break an hour's promise in love? He that will divide a minute into 1,000 parts and break but a part of the 1,000th part of a minute in the affairs of love, it may be said of him that Cupid hath clapped him on the shoulder, but I'll warrant him heart whole." Again, Orlando's indifference to time, his imprecision, serves to indicate his unseriousness as a lover. Ganymede's Rosalind is a timekeeper, above all, one who looks constantly ahead to the time after marriage and paints a bitter picture. "Now tell me how long you would have her after you have possessed her," she asks. "Forever and a day," replies Orlando. "Say a day without the ever," she responds. No, Orlando. Men are April when they woo, December when they wed. Maids are May when they are maids, but the sky changes when they are wives. The twist in the tale comes after their next parting, in which Orlando promises to return by 2:00, and Rosalind lays down the law. "If you break one jot of your promise or come 1 minute behind your hour, I will think you the most pathetical break promise, the most hollow lover, and the most unworthy of her you call Rosalind, that may be chosen out of the gross band of the unfaithful." Well, time is the old justice that examines all such offenders, and let time try. When he does not return, as promised, Rosalind and Celia draw the usual conclusion, but Oliver appears as Orlando's agent to report that Orlando owes his absence to a valiant and bloody fight with a lioness. Oliver recounts that Orlando then, and forgive me for quoting this, it's got real dramatic effect. Orlando led me instantly unto his cave, there stripped himself, and here upon his arm the lioness had torn some flesh away, which all the while had bled. And now he fainted, and cried in fainting upon Rosalind. Brief I recovered him, bound up his wound, and after some small space, being strong at heart, he sent me hither, stranger as I am, to tell this story, that you might excuse his broken promise, and to give this napkin, dyed in his blood, unto the shepherd youth, that he in sport doth call his Rosalind. At this point, Rosalind swoons. At their next encounter, Rosalind dotes on Orlando and makes a slip that suggests she recognizes that Orlando's love is in fact deep-rooted. "Oh, my dear Orlando, how it grieves me to see thee wear thy heart in a scarf." "It is my arm," says Orlando. "I thought thy heart had been wounded with the claws of a lion." "Wounded it is, but with the eyes of a lady." And later in the scene, Ganymede leaves off idle talking and acknowledges that Orlando is, quote, "a gentleman of good conceit," promising that he will be married to Rosalind tomorrow. In this sequence, the pattern is familiar, that Orlando thinks to send the bloody handkerchief to Rosalind in order that she not think him unreliable, shows that he is serious about time and therefore a worthy lover. But this is only an account of the form of the drama, the language in which it is played out. I'm not suggesting, really, even for a moment, that Rosalind is genuinely, deeply concerned about Orlando's punctuality as such, or even that it's the true sign of his seriousness as a lover. Rather, I'm suggesting that Rosalind structures their drama in this way, quoting a concern about male lovers' unseriousness, as a kind of response to the emptiness and unseriousness of time in the forest. Their game is a time game in a timeless setting. For Orlando, the game goes on almost too long. For Rosalind, it must take its proper time, something almost impossible to measure in these idle woods. That sense of time is practically forced, created ex nihilo, and in opposition to the timelessness of Arden. The sense of urgency both she and Orlando feel to be with each other. Rosalind parries into a drama of delayed gratification. Here, as in Love's Labour's Lost, the ending is accompanied by a song suggesting, finally, realignment with the seasons. The plot of As You Like It outside of Arden, if you remember, the wrestling match, the politics, the banishment, the inheritance dispute, really seems to recede into the background and frame the erotic drama within Arden. This latter drama has no necessity. It is deliberate dramatic creation, an impregnation of time which allows Rosalind and Orlando's romance to develop in time and finally bear their marriage at the end of the play, and indeed to bear the undisguised Rosalind. The alternatives of, on the one hand, immediate marriage, as we see with Celia and Oliver, and on the other, a kind of erotic stalemate that never goes anywhere, are avoided by the creation of this drama with its own determinate, natural time. Chiefly, though, what is avoided here is a play, namely As You Like It, without the absorbing game of this courtship in disguise, so that Rosalind's loss would equally be ours. It is as though, and here I'm going to overstate a little bit, but it's as though Shakespeare brings the lovers together too early in the play with no obstacles, so as to stimulate Rosalind's imagination and conceive this drama. You might think that the counterpart is the lovers kind of getting together too late at the end of Love's Labour's Lost. Okay, the tragedies. In As You Like It, we see the erotic or romantic uses of drama as a pregnancy of time. In suggesting that this pregnancy is staged by Rosalind, for example, I'm not demeaning it at all. I'm only suggesting that it's a dramatic attitude assumed against a background of timelessness. Here, her own and Orlando's readiness, and Arden's timelessness. But in both Othello and Hamlet, we'll see that the pregnancy of time emerges as a kind of posture towards action, which can be assumed insincerely or at most ambivalently. Here, the created dramas emerge as alternatives or seeming alternatives to direct action and to total inaction. The title of this lecture, The Womb of Time, comes from the end of Othello's Act 1. Iago reassures his duped accomplice Rodrigo, quote, "There are many events in the womb of time which will be delivered." When Rodrigo, reassured, leaves the stage, Iago starts to plan in soliloquy. He's thinking about his plot to get, if you remember, Cassio in trouble so that he can then get Desdemona to try and reconcile Cassio and Othello so that it will look like Desdemona is interested in Cassio. Cassio's a proper man. Let me see now. To get his place and to plume up my will in double knavery. How? Let's see. After some time to abuse Othello's ears that he is too familiar with his wife. He hath a person and a smooth disposed to be suspected, framed to make women false. The more is of a free and open nature that thinks men honest, that but seem to be so, and will as tenderly be led by the nose as asses are. I have it. It is engendered. Hell and night must bring this monstrous birth to the world's light. I'll read those last two lines again. I have it. It is engendered. Hell and night must bring this monstrous birth to the world's light. So here in this first soliloquy, first genuine soliloquy, Iago's plan, it, is a conception, an engendering. But he does not emerge as the conceiver. He only has it. The plan comes to him in his how, let's see, as a ready conception. Although Iago begins the soliloquy speaking first personally, the plan announces itself as an infinitive, to abuse Othello's ear. It arrives, as thoughts do, but it arrives as something already on the way to realization. Hell and night are the midwives presiding over the plan's quote-unquote monstrous birth. If we trace the development of that monstrous birth throughout the play, we'll see, of course, that Time's pregnancy here is Othello's induced jealousy, culminating in the murder of Desdemona and his own suicide. A drama directed by Iago, which here, in the soliloquy, he seems not to claim as his own. Step one of Iago's plan, as I've said, is to alienate Cassio from Othello by tricking him into a drunken brawl. When the alarm is sounded and Othello roused from his marital bed, he anticipates the monstrosity to come, exclaiming about the clamor, "'Tis monstrous." And I should say that here, in this play, monstrous is really a kind of bell that's rung over and over and over. So I'm just going to run through a few instances of it. When Iago then drops hints that Desdemona is not chaste, Othello tries to pry the secret thought out of his mind. "What dost thou think?" he asks Iago. "Think, my lord? Think, my lord?" Othello parrots him. "By heaven, thou echoest me, as if there were some monster in thy thought too hideous to be shown." The monster here lingers just out of sight, but its presence is deeply and almost universally felt. Emilia and Desdemona will speak of it in the same way, just a scene later. Emilia responds to Desdemona's claim that Othello has no cause to be jealous. "Jealous souls will not be answered so. They are not ever jealous for the cause, but jealous for their jealous. It is a monster, begot upon itself, born on itself." And Desdemona responds, "Heaven keep the monster from Othello's mind." Emilia, like Iago, attributes no other parents to the monstrous birth. The monster comes to be spontaneously, without the interference or mediation of an agent. Yet when Desdemona's dead body is seen, the monstrosity is finally born, and Montano exclaims with more resonance than he knows, looking at the bed, "O monstrous act." Now, to accept these suggestions of impersonal birth is, of course, to be fooled, I think, by a posture of Iago's. We have heard him declare a monstrous birth will come to light, but when he next articulates his plan in soliloquy, he still insists that it's not known to him in his entirety, and that it won't be until it's completely realized. He says, I'll abuse Michael Cassio to the Moor in the right garb, make the Moor thank me, love me, and reward me for making him egregiously an ass and practicing upon his peace and quiet, even to madness. 'Tis here, but yet confused. Knavery's plain face is never seen till used. Here it's as though Iago is both the one concealing his knavery and the one from whom it is concealed. The effect is to emphasize an unfolding, almost a self-clarifying activity, which starts in confusion and ends in use or realization. But Roderigo is growing impatient of this kind of natural development of things, thinking. He's spending all his money also. Iago's gotten him to sell all his lands to finance the plan. When he comes to complain that no progress has been made, Iago chides him for having the wrong attitude towards time. How poor are they that have not patience, Iago counsels. What wound did ever heal but by degrees? Thou knowest we work by wit and not by witchcraft, and wit depends on dilatory time. Dilatory time, time dilated, gratification delayed, patience. This is the mode in which Iago claims to be operating. But then Roderigo leaves the stage, and we see how active Iago really must be. Immediately as Roderigo exits, Iago says, 2 things are to be done. My wife must move for Cassio to her mistress, I'll set her on. Myself a while to draw the Moor apart, and bring him jump when he may Cassio find soliciting his wife. Aye, that's the way, dull not device by coldness and delay. So my point here is just that Iago switches throughout the play between these 2 modes of action, the dilatory and the urgent. Sometimes he acts, sometimes he waits for others to act, and sometimes he speaks of his actions as working like a poison on Othello's mind. In his words, both to others and even sometimes to himself, he appears as a non-agent, accompanying but not causing the events of the play, waiting patiently as they unfold. It is in this deceptive strain that he speaks to Roderigo of the womb of time and its maturing events. When Othello seems to be approaching violence, Iago cautions him, patience, or I shall say you're all in spleen and nothing of a man, and warns him again, keep time in all, he's the voice of patience. But Iago, of course, acts. He stabs, he kills, he conveys information, he drops hints. His disowning of the play's plot ultimately fails when his villainy is discovered and Desdemona and Othello's corpses lie on their bed, and Lodovico exhorts him in the last scene, look on the tragic loading of this bed, this is thy work. And Iago's work, which he has indeed tried to disclaim throughout, is not tragic only in the sense that it is catastrophic. It's tragic also in the dramatic sense, forming as it does essentially the entire plot of the play. The malign, poisonous pregnancy of time has been revealed as Iago, the dramatist's own handiwork. Okay, I see I'm slower than I'd like, so I'm gonna, Hamlet, quickly. If Iago's posture is the pretense of drama as pregnancy as opposed to action, Hamlet's ambivalence towards taking the action of revenge stimulates a pregnancy of time that is quite literally a theatrical drama. From Hamlet's first appearance on stage, his troubles are linked to some hidden inner space, as he indicates in his first speech of more than one line, when his mother says, why seems it so particular with thee? Hamlet responds, seems, madam, nay it is, I know not seems. And I won't read the whole speech, wonderful though it is, but he ends with, I have that within which passes show, these behaviors of mourning, but the trappings and the suits of woe. But that within has nowhere to go at this point and nothing to do. Hamlet is stuck with it indefinitely. It resists what both Gertrude and Claudius characterize as the natural course of events, the getting over of grief. There is no end in sight to Hamlet's grief, no sense of its temporality. It is not like a healing wound. It makes no progress in time. And in his soliloquy in that scene, he complains, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. This, I'm suggesting, is a portrait of empty time. When Hamlet is given the brief of vengeance by the ghost, he seems to intend to wipe out everything else from his mind. Yet a few scenes later, we find him complaining of his inaction in strange contrast to the emotional power of the player king's recitation. What's Hecuba to him or he to her, that he should weep for her? What would he do, had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears, and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed the very faculty of eyes and ears. Yet I, a dull and muddy mettled rascal, peak like John a dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing. One might expect Hamlet to have switched say and do in these lines, so that he would be doing and the player king would be saying. But if he's unpregnant, which can mean several other things, but most obviously, of course, means not pregnant, one might ask what it would mean for him to be pregnant of his cause. The resolution to the soliloquy involves the moment in which Hamlet conceives of his plan to, quote, catch the conscience of the king, using the play. Like the antic disposition he has put on, it is a wait-and-see sort of plan, a mousetrap, as the play is called, rather than a direct route to revenge. In the very next scene, Claudius, overhearing Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy and his biting exchange with Ophelia, remarks, "Love, his affections do not that way tend, nor what he spake, though it lacked form a little, was not like madness. There's something in his soul, o'er which his melancholy sits in brood, and I do doubt the hatch and the disclose will be some danger." Hamlet's melancholy seems to Claudius like a mother bird incubating some danger, as he says. The emphasis here is not that something is gestating in Hamlet's soul, but that something in Hamlet's soul, his melancholy, is working on that gestation. And although Claudius's idea of what that is still vague, the metaphor is almost the same as Hamlet's. Moreover, in Hamlet's case, the pregnancy is literally a drama, and Claudius seems to sense something dramatic about it, for it is not only the hatch he mentions, but the disclose or reveal that will be dangerous. For both Hamlet and Claudius, what is within Hamlet is something maturing, gestating, and not something ready for deployment at any moment, but something with a dramatic possibility within it. Hamlet takes on the role of theater master in this middle section of the play and briefly impregnates time with a drama that unfolds, as I said, the play, The Mousetrap. But upon being sent to England, he falls back into a certain kind of passivity and eventually a kind of fatigued providentialism in the last scenes of the play. On his way to the ships, in only one version of the play, he spies Fortinbras crossing through Denmark on his way into Poland and is driven to soliloquize about his own inaction, his dull revenge. Forgive me for reading at length here, it's a great soliloquy. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event, a thought which quartered hath but one part wisdom, and ever 3 parts coward, I do not know why yet I live to say this thing's to do, sith I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. Fortinbras, on the other hand, is not only pregnant of his cause, but has already hatched it. Hamlet continues, examples gross as earth exhort me. Witness this army of such mass and charge, led by a delicate and tender prince, whose spirit with divine ambition puffed makes mouths at the invisible event, exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Rightly to be great is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor's at the stake. So, remember melancholy brooding unhatched trouble in Hamlet's soul? Fortinbras quarrels here for an eggshell in Hamlet's way of thinking, the smallest remnant of a deliberation. Fortinbras's intention has long since burst from its shell, as it were, and Hamlet's plan is developmentally behind, still indefinitely brooding. And the plan, indeed, hardly comes to fruition. Throughout Act 5, Hamlet casts himself as an instrument of providence. He stabs Claudius only after he, like his father, has been poisoned. He does accomplish the revenge plot, but he can't be said to have orchestrated its moment of execution, nor to have allowed things to unfold naturally in a kind of mastermind Iago style. The revenge plot itself, Hamlet has not dramatized, but merely the prior plot, the kind of intermediate plot to verify Claudius's guilt. Hamlet's sense of his own delay and inaction, his anticipation of action, and the pull between these two, these are in the background of the play he has staged and partly authors, the gradual unfolding which is both part of his plan and parallel to it, which both advances him in his secret revenge and ultimately gives him away as dangerous. It is an embedded, different kind of action, and it makes him giddy for once to be, quote, pregnant of his cause. Okay. Take a step back from these already distant readings of these four plays. So if drama promises to stage time full, pregnant, or en route to delivery, Shakespeare frequently thematizes that promise, that need, by, for example, creating a background of empty time and a foreground in which a dramatizing character impregnates time by creating drama on stage. That is, Shakespeare, the dramatist, is at work showing his characters dramatizing. Now, this doesn't always mean the same thing in every play, as I've said, but we can discern, I think, two main forms of this idea. The first is the comic one, found in Love's Labour's Lost and As You Like It, in which it accompanies a recognition that romantic desire can't simply be fulfilled, but must be played out. Both plays use the year to stand for sufficient maturation. And in the two tragedies, impregnating time seems to be a posture that aims at creating a drama which will naturally lead to an event, instead of bringing that event about directly through action. Okay. In all these cases, I suggest, Shakespeare is interested in the way that a drama fills empty time with full time. An action, which can be instantaneous, changes the course of things. It is plot, but it's not necessarily drama. As we hear in Hamlet's reproaches to himself, unambivalent actions are assertions of the being of the doer, like Fortinbras. But impregnations of time are about the event, not the deed or the doer. They aim most obviously at a farther goal, which is not to be brought about directly. Yet an underlying aim, I insist, is not the event itself, but the filling of time with significance, its impregnation with events to come. Okay. I'll skip ahead here. And I want to ask now, I want to turn away from Shakespeare and ask a little bit about in what way systems of thought might, sort of like philosophies, theologies, etc., might take up this idea and attempt to respond to the anxiety about time, to which time's pregnancy is a kind of solution. I had a couple of these. I'm going to skip Leibniz, sorry. But I'm just going to end with a little passage from Heidegger that I really love. So, following Shakespeare, I want to think mostly about what the idea of time's pregnancy could mean to us in a fundamentally human way. That is, I want to think less about the very possibility of significance, sort of metaphysically conceived, and more about the experience of significance and its absence. I'm thinking in particular of Heidegger's account of boredom in his 1929-1930 course on the fundamental concepts of metaphysics. Here is a portrait of totally empty time. We are sitting, for example, in the tasteless station of some lonely minor railway. It is 4 hours until the next train arrives. The district is uninspiring. We do have a book in our rucksack, though. Shall we read? No. Or think through a problem, some question? We are unable to. We read the timetables or study the table giving the various distances from this station to other places we are not otherwise acquainted with at all. He doesn't have a cell phone, obviously. We look at the clock. Only a quarter of an hour has gone by. Then we go out onto the local road. We walk up and down just to have something to do, but it is no use. Then we count the trees along the road, look at our watch again, exactly 5 minutes since we last looked at it. Fed up with walking back and forth, we sit down on a stone, draw all kinds of figures in the sand, and in so doing catch ourselves looking at our watch yet again, half an hour, and so on. This, I think, is the bleak vision behind the wager with which we started, the wager behind going to the theater. If time is not filled or staged as if filled, then it has the potential to be horrifyingly, mind-numbingly empty. But for Heidegger, there is a profundity to boredom. He calls it deep boredom. He starts from a feeling of emptiness. He says, enigmatically, that which is boring as he calls that which is boring that which holds us in limbo and leaves us empty. But what is evident from examinations of phenomena, like the tedious railway scene, is this. He says, what is boring is neither beings nor things as such, whether individually or in a context, nor human beings as people we find before us and can ascertain, neither objects nor subjects, but temporality as such. Yet in this experience of utter emptiness, of a temporality which has nothing to offer us, is the instance par excellence in which true potentiality of what Heidegger calls Dasein, a difficult term to translate, comes to light. So Dasein, I'd say something like a fullness of being or openness to futurity or pure potentiality or something like that. But I'm sure you'll quibble with that in the question period. That's fine. If to be situated in the world is to have a relationship to the objects in it, utter boredom is a negation, a refusal of those relationships. I can't get anything I can't relate to the world. Hence the twist, the unexpected divergence from the road I've pointed out in these Shakespeare plays. For Heidegger, it is precisely this total shutdown of the potentialities of existence, the emptiness of time and temporality, that first makes us acutely aware of these potentialities. And I'll steal here from Giorgio Agamben's reading of these lectures, because he says very helpfully for my argument that the capacity for boredom, this sensitivity to the emptiness of time, is anthropogenesis, the becoming of living man. In a way, then, Heidegger's account of boredom suggests, at least to Agamben, that empty time is hardly empty at all. It is itself pregnant with a certain relationship to existence and to the future. He suggests, I think, that a certain kind of behind-the-scenes philosophical drama Agamben, contends with this emptiness rather than filling it. A superimposed drama of time's fullness would in this way cover not only empty time, but a hidden philosophical drama latent in empty time. And so I want to end by reprimanding those of you with philosophical ambitions for coming to this lecture at all. You ought instead to have spent the evening waiting at the train station, watching the hands of the clock drag slowly, meaninglessly forward, painstakingly uncovering the denied potencies of your being. Thank goodness for me, this town does not have a train station. Thank you all for coming.